All right, welcome to our weekly New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. Atypical this week because we're on a Wednesday instead of a Thursday. Tonight, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce Peter Kerasotis, who's going to be talking about his wonderful biography on Felipe Alou called My Baseball Journey. Tomorrow is Felipe's 87th birthday, so that's why we chose to do this today. Before I get started with the meeting, just a few brief things to discuss with you guys. Next week's meeting will return to Thursdays. We were supposed to have Rob Garrett talking about the Giants' influence in Japanese baseball. That had to be postponed. Instead, we're going to have Richard Glazer, who's going to be doing a New York Giants trivia night. There'll be prizes awarded. The trivia will take place from the mid-1940s until the Giants leave New York in 1957. Today marks the 50th anniversary of Willie Mays getting traded to the Mets. And of course, you all know 3 days later, he beat the Giants with a home run at Shea Stadium. I wrote a letter to the Mets today suggesting that they think about maybe retiring Willie's number. And I didn't have a great response, but I didn't get a bad response. I'll share that with you guys later. And lastly, my former student from 1997, Jonah Kim, performed the national anthem at Oracle Park on Monday night. And I want to shout out to the ailing Dick Swig, who got me directed into the right people to speak, to go about doing this. And I spoke to Jonah after, and he was just, he's a really renowned composer of music. And he's a wonderful young man. And he was so delighted. He's played all these concerts everywhere. And he said this was one of the highlights of his life, playing at Oracle Park, and hopefully they will call him back next year to perform again. So without any further ado, it is my distinct privilege to welcome Peter Kerasotis to the New York Giants Preservation Society to discuss his book on Felipe Alou. Peter, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Nice to be here. So it sounds like you guys are all in New York.
No, we have many San Franciscans, and,
Okay.
New Jerseyites, and Jim, where do you live? Folkerts.
New Jersey, formerly Yonkers.
Yeah, we have people popping in from Delaware and Florida and stuff, so and Arizona. So we're all over the map.
Well, good. Yeah, I'm originally from Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn. My dad grew up in Brooklyn, and we lived in Comac. And I got a good friend of mine whose last name is Goldfarb. He's from Massapequa, and he was our baseball coach. What's that?
We're in Brooklyn. That's where I came from.
Well, Sheepshead Bay.
Nice.
And we lived on Avenue U. And then we moved out to Long Island when I was a toddler. And then my dad moved us to Florida in 1966.
Peter,
But
we were.
I'm a Goldfarb, but not in Comac.
No, my friend is from Massapequa.
Well, that's where I grew up, but I don't think we know one another.
Okay. His name is Chuck Goldfarb, and he's from Massapequa.
No.
He was our high school baseball coach, and Clint Hurdle was our big star who went on to, someone mentioned Pittsburgh. He went on to manage Colorado and Pittsburgh. And Bruce Bochy is from where I live now in Brevard County. He's from Melbourne. We went to the same junior college, and he's a good friend. He was actually the guy that facilitated the writing of this book. So if you haven't seen it, here's the book, and you can see that Bruce wrote the Pedro Martinez wrote the forward, but if you get the paperback, Bruce Bochy wrote the afterword. And so what happened was, I've been a newspaper journalist for many years, and I eventually moved back to my hometown in Florida and was working for my hometown paper, which is And Florida, as you know, is big spring training. So I was always looking for local angles during spring training. And one time the Expos were coming in to play our spring training team, which at the time I think was the Washington Nationals. And so I'm just kind of checking bios, and I noticed that Felipe had started his career in Cocoa, Florida, which is the next town over from where I live and in our county here. So I went up to him before the game, and I introduced myself, and I asked him if he remembered anything from playing baseball here in Cocoa, Florida. And if you've ever talked to him, he's got almost a photographic memory. He remembered the family that he lived with, the street that he lived on, where he used to go fishing. He told me stories that were detailed. He had started his career in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and they wouldn't let him play because they had passed a law that guaranteed segregation. So when the Giants, at the time the New York Giants, saw what was going on, and he only got 9 at-bats, and they were probably at road games, they put him on a Greyhound bus and they sent him to Cocoa, Florida. Now, he had always wanted to become a doctor. And if you talk to Felipe, he's one of the most intelligent guys I've ever been around. And he grew up dirt poor in the Dominican, but they had an uncle, his mom's brother, who was in the military and was fairly high up. They had a dictator, Rafael Trujillo. And if you're a dictator, you take care of your military because they will take care of you. So they had a little bit of money because of the uncle, and he started going to college there in Santo Domingo and never really played organized baseball. He was mostly a track and field guy. That happened by accident. He was walking by the track field one day, and there was a javelin, and they asked him, "Hey, can you pick that up and throw it back?" So he picked it up and threw it back, and it just sailed. And the coach came over and said, "Who are you?" He later set the national record for the javelin throw. So he was on track to become a doctor, and they had the Pan Am Games. I think it was in Mexico City, if I remember correctly. And one of the baseball players got sent home for insubordination. So they came to Felipe and they said, "Baseball is more important than track and field. We don't need you to compete in track and field. We need you to help us on the baseball team." You know, Cuba's there, a lot of teams, Puerto Rico, United States. And he led them to the Pan American Games title and beat the United States. So there was a scout, Rabbit Martinez, who was from the DR, was scouting for the Giants, and they came to the home. It was just a little shack. It was 15 by 15 feet. And Felipe, his 3 brothers, there's the youngest brother, Juan, who Felipe said might have been the best of them all, and his story and what happened to him is in the book, and his sisters. So there were 6 or 7 kids. Felipe grew up sleeping on the floor pretty much outside the house. And they came to the shack and they offered him 200 pesos to sign a professional contract. And his parents said, "No way, he's going to become a doctor." And Rabbit Martinez, the scout, came back a couple of weeks later with some of the players on the team, impressed upon his parents how good he is, and they wanted to sign him for 200 pesos. And Felipe had heard that his father was behind on paying the grocer the food bill to feed the family, and he was the oldest of all the kids. And his father's food bill was 200 pesos. So he signed essentially to feed his family, his parents and his siblings, to pay off the food bill from the grocer for 200 pesos. And that's when they sent him to Louisiana. So when they put him on the bus, his mother is white and his father is black. He had heard about racism, but really hadn't encountered it, knew it existed. And then he comes to this country and it's just 1950s America, rabid, R-A-B-I-D, not Rabbit Martinez, racism, just the ugly things that they were calling him and different things, the separate bathrooms and all of that. So, a lot is made about Derek Jeter being an interracial athlete. Felipe was way before that, star in baseball. So he told me that day when we talked during spring training that he knew the bus was supposed to stop at Cocoa. He couldn't speak English. He sat at the front of the bus so that he could ask every time there was a stop, Cocoa, is this Cocoa? And the bus driver was annoyed, like, go sit in the back of the bus like you're supposed to sit. But finally, he just gave up and let Felipe sit there. And Felipe told me all I wanted to do was stay on the bus because I knew the very last stop was Miami. And I wanted to go to Miami, go back home to the Dominican, go back to school and become a doctor. He said, but I had signed a contract and I had given my word, and my family name is important to me. And so he got off on Cocoa in the middle of the night, slept on a park bench. The next day, some woman saw him in the black section of town and tried to talk to him and figured out he was a ball player, took him to where some of the other Latino ball players were in town. And he started playing baseball, led the Florida State League with a 380 batting average. And this guy who had never really played organized baseball, now 2 years later, he's on the first team in San Francisco when the Giants moved from New York to San Francisco in 1958. And they were playing at Seal Stadium. And 2 years later, he's in the outfield with Willie Mays. And then, of course, Matty and Jesus followed him. And you know the story of all of that. So just a fascinating guy. And if you look, you know, the book was more a labor of love. You don't, unless you get a big time publisher, you don't make any money. It probably cost me to write the book. So I'm not trying to sell books because I need income. I'm trying to get his story out there. And Tony La Russa and I have had some deep conversations about his desire to see Felipe in the Hall of Fame. And some of the things that you think about with Felipe, the first born and raised Dominican to make it to Major League Baseball. Now you're going to come back and say, well, what about Ozzie Virgil? Ozzie was born in the Dominican, but his parents were not Dominican. They had come from, I believe, Turks and Caicos, and they were migrating through, and then they were in the Dominican when Ozzie was born, and then they went to Puerto Rico, and then he grew up pretty much in the Bronx and was in the military. So the people in the DR never really heard of Ozzie Virgil until later, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, he was born in the Dominican. But Felipe is the first born and raised Dominican to become a major league player, to play in the World Series, to become a major league manager, and then also became a front office executive, which he still is. So, you know, my argument or my debate or my passion soapbox is we have retroactively and correctly gone back and righted the wrongs of the black players in this country who didn't get a shot, didn't get a chance, and have put them in the Hall of Fame. But some of the Latino pioneers like Felipe, and as you probably all know, the DR per capita produces more major league players than any other country in the world. He was the pioneer. If you go to the DR, and I've been there a few times, and you go through certain areas, customs and different things, and they have some of their history on the wall, you'll see Felipe Alou there on the wall. When I talked to Pedro Martinez about writing the foreword, he told me, he said, you don't understand. He goes, in your country, when you're reading about your history in elementary school and you're learning about Jim Thorpe or Babe Ruth and different people in boxing or whatever, he goes, in our books in school, it's Felipe Alou. So he is revered in that country for showing the way and paving the way for Dominican players. And he didn't get a chance to manage until he was 57 years old. And those of you, I heard some talking about the Mets game and all of that. And Luis Rojas, as you probably know, is his son. And here's the reason why it's a Rojas. His real last name is Rojas. And Latinos, his name is Felipe Rojas Alou. They attach the mother's maiden name at the end. So his father's last name, the paternal last name is Rojas. When he came to this country, they saw Felipe Rojas Alou. They thought his last name was Alou, and it's not. It's his mother's maiden name. They started putting it on the back of his jersey and things like that. He didn't know enough English to correct it. So that name stuck. And his children, any of them who were born in this country, like Moises, they have the Alou last name. If they're born in the Dominican, they have the proper last name, which is Rojas. But Luis Rojas, when he became the Mets manager, is 38 years old. That was about how old Joe Torre was when he became a player manager for the Mets. And Joe Torre was his roommate with the Braves and is a good friend and has a blurb for this book. And Joe Torre will frankly tell you that Felipe told him how to be a man, how to be a leader. Buck Showalter reveres him, managed against him in the minor leagues, and how much he learned just by watching how Felipe managed. La Russa the same way in the minor leagues. Jimmy Leland the same way in the minor leagues. All of those guys got opportunities to manage at a young age. Leland kind of worked his way up the system a little longer. But because of being black and Latino, Felipe didn't get his chance until he was 57. Now you see guys like Alex Cora, his son Luis Rojas, becoming managers at a young age. And La Russa and myself and Bruce Bochy, who else was in that room? But there were several of us when we had a book signing and he threw out the first pitch at Fenway Park 3 years ago. We got a private room and we had lunch before the game. And I told Tony, I said, he's like number 3 on all-time wins list for managers. And I said, if Felipe had gotten his start around 40 years old and had just had a pretty good career as a manager, I said, he'd be top 5 right now as a manager in all-time wins. Of course, we know about the 1994 season when he had the best team in baseball with the Montreal Expos and the season got canceled. And so, again, we have retroactively corrected how black players were held back. I think it's time to go back and look at Felipe Alou and put him in the Hall of Fame for the career that he has had in baseball. And there were other guys that came and couldn't handle it, couldn't handle the racism. Jackie Robinson handled it. Guys like Felipe Alou, Roberto Clemente, who was a very good friend of his. There's a whole chapter in there about his friendship and stories with Roberto Clemente. To me, it's long overdue, and I'm not the only one who feels that way. La Russa feels strongly that way, that he belongs in the Hall of Fame. So anyway, I'll take some questions. The book is, you learn a lot about the family and the brothers and what it was like growing up and what their lives were like as kids. There is a 4th brother. He lives in Puerto Rico now, Juan Rojas. And Felipe told me he was like a corner infielder with power. He could hit for average like Matty, but he was a barrel-chested guy and he could really hit. There's interesting stories about what happened to him in the DR and how his career got waylaid because of the revolution that was going on after the dictator Rafael Trujillo was assassinated. And then in coming to this country, he played with Willie Mays. He played with Hank Aaron. He managed Barry Bonds. So there's a lot of baseball stories in there. And I stay away from just regurgitating box scores. When I get baseball books like that, and it's just telling me about the game, like I'm reading the newspaper the next morning. The only time I really slowed down and did that was the 62 World Series and kind of went game by game through that series. But by and large, this is a very anecdotal heavy book that tells the story of a family and then his journey as far as paving the way and becoming the revered figure in baseball that he's become. And guys who play for him, they love him. They not only speak highly of him, but they all talk about how much they learned from him. And I talked about his memory. Guys would tell me that maybe they were playing a game in August and they'd bring in a relief pitcher and he'd pull a guy aside and he'd say, hey, you're going up against so-and-so. You remember when we played them in May, he pitched you this way. And whoever was coming to the plate would look at him like, how do you remember that? I mean, he remembered the pitch sequence. He would say, so be ready for this or that. So just a tremendous baseball mind and just a mind overall. for what goes on in the world and different things. You know, one of my favorite people just to sit down and talk about what's going on in society and in baseball, and just has a lot of insight and a lot of wisdom, and I think it comes through in the book. If you look on Amazon, it's got, I think, 149 reviews, and it's an average 5-star rating. So I'm really proud of it, and I'm really most happy that he and I have become very close friends, and we talk about every week now. I just texted his daughter a little while ago to see if she could get him on Zoom tonight, because they're at his daughter's house right now, and she's on her way from home from work. She's an attorney, and they're over in St. Petersburg. They got a new grandbaby. So anyway, that's kind of an overview, and I would be happy to entertain some questions and go in
Peter,
the direction you'd like to go.
yeah, Peter, thank you so much. So what is the best way to obtain the book is through Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble on their website. I don't think you'll find it. You know, bookstores pretty non-existent nowadays. If you live in an area where you have Barnes and Noble, they kind of have the latest baseball books that are out, and then some of the old standard favorites that are there. So I don't know that you'll be able to go and buy it off the shelf at Barnes and Noble or Books A Million, but you could order it through them if you want to go to a brick and mortar store. But Amazon has got it, and it's got the hardback and the paperback, and there's even an audiobook now of it as well.
Terrific. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions, and then we have people raise their hands. So, Peter, this might be a silly question to you. I know the Giants, the New York Giants drafted him, and he was so revered in the Dominican Republic. You know, a few years ago in Upper Manhattan, they renamed the street Matty Alou Street or Drive or whatever. Any reason why they didn't name it after Felipe or just call it Alou Way or something?
You know, now that you're mentioning it, I'd forgotten. I remember hearing something about a Matty Alou. I don't know. I'll have to ask him that question.
I'm sure he's not upset. I just, you know,
No.
with the with the Giants being in New York and him being drafted by the Giants and the revelries held in DR and with mostly a Spanish population there, I would have thought they would have named it after Felipe or call it Alou Way or whatever.
Yeah, and they both played for the Yankees, so I don't think it has anything to do with the Giants.
Right.
He never played for the New York Giants.
And my other question is, with the continual changing of committees in Cooperstown, I think they have a new committee now.
After I leave,
Hold on, I'm sorry.
I probably,
With the new committee, do you think Felipe's name might be brought up? You know, I think the committee is basically from the 70s or 80s onward.
Yeah, I was just reading about the new committee, so it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. Now, I know, and you probably know that Tony La Russa got a lot of heat because of the Harold Baines situation. So when he and I have talked, he has kind of distanced himself from really being at the forefront of pushing certain people through. Pedro Martinez now is very active in some of these committees. And Pedro very much, he considers Felipe like a second father and very much wants to see him in the Hall of Fame, and credits Felipe a lot for the career that he had because, you know, when Pedro came up, Ramon, his brother, was the one that was supposed to be the big pitcher. And Pedro, they thought, is not a big guy. And when they were looking to trade him to Montreal, they came to Felipe and he said, bring him here. Bring him here. I know him. I know. And so when Pedro got there, he was, you know, when you get traded, you're a little bit, you lose a little bit of your confidence a little bit, a lot of guys, because the team that drafted you and developed you, now you feel like they gave up on you. And Felipe called him in the office and gave him a baseball and said, look, he said, you're going to be my fifth starter, because he didn't know what role he was going to have in the team. In spring training, he said, you're going to be my fifth starter. But when I put this ball in your hand, you're my number one starter that day. And he instilled so much confidence in Pedro. So I think Pedro is going to be proactive in trying to see that Felipe gets into the Hall of Fame.
And just an afterthought, if he ever got in, you assume it would be in with an Expo hat?
That is another good question because I'm assuming it would be a Giants hat
Oh, really? Great.
because the Giants, he's employed still by the Giants. He did manage the Giants. He did play for the Giants. So he didn't play. Well, he finished his career a little bit with the Expos, but he played for the Giants, managed them, has been a front office executive. And about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the Giants opened up a state-of-the-art academy in the Dominican Republic, and it's the Felipe Alou Academy. So their academy in the DR. And by the way, it was him and Julian Javier who, back in the day, they started a winter league in the DR. And it was basically to try to, these young guys, they don't know the language. They come, they get a minor league contract, they kind of flame out, they mature a little bit, and they really have no place to go and no eyeballs are on them. So they started a league in the Dominican that has morphed into every major league team now has an academy in the DR. And that's another pioneering thing that Felipe was on the front end of developing that post-playing career. So I would think he'd go in as a Giant for all those reasons. I mean, the academy is named after him. I can't see him going in with an Expos hat.
Thank you so much, Peter. We'll go with Jeff Hennig, Dan Taylor, and then Bill Schiffer. Jeff, go ahead.
Thanks, Gary. Peter, thanks for being with us. I bought your book. I read it maybe 6 or so months ago. Thoroughly enjoyed it. A couple of things. One being not that important. Felipe's got a lot of kids, which really surprised me. But that notwithstanding, I kind of see a parallel between him and Dusty Baker in the sense that both had very good major league playing careers, not over the top outstanding, but very good careers. And they both went on to become very successful managers. And the Montreal portion of it, managing the first team in Canada and bringing that sport. I think if they ever got a decent stadium in Montreal, the franchise would be very successful. Gary took a little bit of my thunder away. I was going to ask you about the Hall of Fame credentials of Felipe as well. But do you kind of see, in a sense, a similar path or a similar parallel in a sense between him and Dusty?
Very much so. And up until he got a hold of the Yankees, Joe Torre. Joe Torre had a good playing career. I mean, Felipe and Matty finished 1-2 in batting in 1966. I mean, he had a very good career, not a Hall of Fame playing career. Same with Joe Torre. Joe Torre did not go into the Hall of Fame as a player. And so you look at Dusty, and people forget that Dusty was a really good player. And Joe Torre, and there's a lot of movement now for Dusty to get into the Hall of Fame. Had Joe Torre not gotten that Yankees job, would he be in the Hall of Fame now? Had he not started managing at a young age and racked up all those wins, would he be in the Hall of Fame now? Had the Montreal Expos been able to finish out with the rest of Major League Baseball that 1994 season, there were guys that came up to Felipe after the season got canceled, some of the Braves players, and said, "You had our number. You guys had the best team in baseball." Had they played out the 1994 World Series and the Expos won the World Series, the 1994 season and the Expos won the World Series, they wouldn't have broken up that team. And after that season, that John Wetland went to the Yankees, and I mean, it was a fire sale. The whole team just got dismantled. Had the 94 season played out, and they would have at least been a playoff team and gone perhaps deep in the playoffs at least, might he have had the dynasty in the 90s that Joe Torre enjoyed with the Yankees? Don't know. But yeah, I look at Dusty Baker, Joe Torre, and Felipe as sort of a 3 parallel careers. Torre broke through with the Yankees. Dusty and Felipe did not. So yeah, and Dusty before taking the Astros job was in the front office with Felipe with the Giants as well. So they were both front office guys too.
Thank you.
Dan Taylor, you're up.
Oh, Peter, I just wanted to compliment you. I thought it was a terrific book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. a few years ago when the Giants AAA club was here in Fresno. I was in the press box one night, and right at first pitch, I hear somebody scoot the chair out next to me, and I turn, and it's Felipe sitting down next to me. And for the next 2 hours, we had this, I was just listening. It was a fascinating conversation. I learned so much from him. He was fun, philosophical, insightful. And you mentioned authors not making a lot of money on books, and I can agree. But if those 2 hours were that memorable for me, I can only imagine how fulfilling this project was for you with all the time you've spent with him. And I think sometimes riches for an author aren't measured in the bank account. So congratulations. It was a terrific job.
Thank you. You know, he lives about 2.5 hours away from me here in Florida. And the book Tuesdays with Maury, if you're familiar with it, is Mitch Albom, the sports writer and columnist, going back and visiting his college professor and writing about those conversations. That was my Tuesdays. I would drive down in the morning to Boynton Beach, where he lives, and he'd be waiting for me. He had a little home office down there, some memorabilia up, but the rest of the house, you wouldn't even know he was a major league player or manager. And we'd have lunch, and he'd usually make it. And we'd sit in his office and for the rest of the day, and I would just take notes and develop whatever chapter we were working on and drive home that night. And it was like just sitting at the feet of a wonderful professor and listening to his wisdom and recollections of different things. He was very, you know, when Pedro and I did the forward together, I had read his book, and I asked him, because as a writer, you're kind of interested on how other processes play out when they're doing a book like this. And Pedro goes, oh, he goes, he mentioned the writer. He goes, he did a good job with it. I read most of it. And Felipe was involved with every word of this book. And English is his second language. And we'd be on chapter 5, and he'd call me up and he says, oh, he goes, I've been thinking about chapter 2. He goes, we use this word. And he mentioned the word. He goes, I think this word is a better word for that. And, you know, I go back and look at the sentence 3 chapters earlier, and I'd be like, I'm the writer, and you just came up with a better word. I mean, everything was read over by him, and he really was very much involved. And he had a good sense about him as to, sometimes we'd go down a rabbit hole, and I knew it wasn't something that we would get in the book. And then he'd stop himself and say, you know, that's a pretty good story, but that's really not a story for the book. Let's get back on topic. So sometimes guys are not that aware. They just think something's interesting, and it's not for a book. It's interesting, but and then they want to get it in the book, and you're like, no. That's just not. Very, very insightful. Spending time with him and working on this project.
How's his health?
He's got some heart issues. I talked to him about a week ago. He's had some surgeries. His voice is strong, but he's hunched over a lot now. And he had some heart procedures right before COVID, and he was telling me that he's got to, his doctor wants to check him out again, but he keeps plugging along. They just had a grandbaby. And so someone mentioned a bunch of kids. He's been married 4 times. The 4th wife is French Canadian. They've got 2 children. And so the daughter, it's a son and a daughter, the daughter just gave them their first grandbaby from that marriage. So they're very much involved. So they spend almost every week in St. Pete, and they come back home for the weekends. So they're driving back and forth. So I know for him to be able to do that, he's in decent health, but not great. Nothing life-threatening, but just, you know, as someone mentioned in the email, he's turning 87 tomorrow. I think it was mentioned tonight on Zoom.
Thank you.
Gary?
Bill, you're up, and then Frank.
No, I just want to know, is my mic working?
Your mic is working great, Frank.
All right, I'll go
Hi,
on.
Peter.
Okay.
Hi, Peter. I just want to say I really enjoyed the book. A lot of great insight to Felipe, and hopefully he does get in the Hall of Fame. I just like some of the stories, like the funny story of Willie McCovey teaching him how to drive in San Francisco. That had to be a great thing to talk about, right?
Yeah, well, he and McCovey were roommates in the minor leagues, and they went in and bought but McCovey had a car,
Right.
and it was leaking water, and so they would have to stop every several blocks and put more water in the radiator, and it was Jose Pagan who taught him how to drive in
Oh,
San
it's Jose,
Francisco.
okay.
Jose Pagan, but yeah, when he and McCovey roomed together, and I mean, these are the things, you know, played with Mays, played with Aaron, managed Bonds, roommates with Joe Torre, roommates with Willie McCovey. There's just a treasure trove of stories that are on the
Didn't they also
baseball field.
they also missed a plane, didn't they? They were supposed to go to. They missed a flight, right? They got in trouble.
Exactly, because they were with McCovey's sister in
Right, they were eating,
Los
right?
Angeles, and they were trying to get to the airport, and they saw this plane flying overhead. They knew they were late, and Felipe said, "That's our plane." And from that day forward, if you're with Felipe, he is always early everywhere you go. He never wants to get there on time. He wants to get there early.
And just one other thing, the 2003 season where they were wire to wire and they should have beaten those rotten Marlins, that bothers him, right? That Jacob Cruz dropping that fly ball, because they should have won that series, you know?
Yes, very much so. You know how it is with a lot of athletes and people in sports. They do remember the victories, but it's those
Worse. Well, even the
losses
World
that-
Series, he's still mad striking out in the World Series in that the ninth inning.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But anyway, thank you. Great book, though.
Thank you. And if any of you know how to leave a review on Amazon, that's the lifeblood. That gets other people.
Okay.
Yeah, please do that.
The word's got to get out on him, and we need to do that, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate the reviews. And the more people that are aware of his story, the more the efforts to get him in the Hall of Fame start snowballing in the right direction.
Peter, you know, our group will be 100% behind that. So any information, you know, I send out to, you know, all of the people in our group. To piggyback on Bill's comments, in 2002, after the Giants lost, they decided to let go of Dusty Baker, mutual decision, whatever. Was Felipe the first choice? And if he was it because of his similarity, like you said, to Dusty Baker's way of managing and Joe Torre's?
I'm trying to remember now. I don't think the only similarity I've heard with regards to, I don't think they would hire him and Path. Dave Dombrowski, I got to know Dave real well because he was the general manager of the Marlins, and the Marlins were spring training in my county, and we got to know each other well. And Dombrowski will tell you that when he was with the Expos, one of the greatest mistakes he made was not recognizing Felipe Alou as a big league skipper early on. And when he hired Alex Cora in Boston, I asked Dave, I said, you hiring Alex Cora, now if you know the Boston market historically, it's been way behind as far as hiring blacks and Latinos and integrating. And, you know, everybody knows the story of the Red Sox being one of the last teams in Major League Baseball to integrate. So now to have a Latino manager. And when I asked Dave about hiring Alex Cora, I said, did you think about Felipe Alou? He says, absolutely. He said, I was not going to make that same mistake twice. And Alex Cora is legitimately a very good manager. But as far as managing the Giants, I think by then, Felipe in the baseball world, people knew how smart he was and how much of a leader he was. So I think Brian Sabian and the crew out there hired him on his own merit, not comparables to anybody else. And it's in the book a little bit, but George Steinbrenner saw it in him as well. And there was always a feeling in his discussions with Steinbrenner through the years, even when he managed other teams, that at some point George was going to tap into him to manage the Yankees, which never happened. I mean, once they got Joe Torre, Joe Torre rode that wagon for a long time and won 4 World Series. But inside the baseball world, by the time the Giants hired him, and he almost got hired by the Dodgers, which is in the book. Ron Peronowski and some of the Dodgers officials came to his home, and he was all set to sign. And he gave the Expos a chance to keep him out of loyalty to the Expos. Otherwise, he would have been the Dodgers manager straight from managing the Expos. So he was known on his own merits.
Thank you. Frank, did you have a question?
Well, I came in late, so I may be repetitious. What other siblings did the 3 ball players have?
So the 3 Alou brothers.
Yes.
So there's Felipe, Matty, and Jesus, and then there's the youngest is Juan, and the last name is Rojas. In the Dominican, their last real name is Rojas, and I think 2 sisters. I should know that off the top of my head, but there's 2 sisters. And what's interesting is that all of them from this 15 by 15 foot shack with no flooring, just a dirt floor, no electricity. He's got a sister who became a veterinarian. Of course, the 3 brothers. Jesus runs the Dominican Academy for the Red Sox. Just very bright family. Just all of them have accomplished. And his brother Juan graduated summa cum laude, whatever Latin way to pronounce it, as an engineer, and is retired now in Puerto Rico, but was a very, very bright guy. And just as a synopsis, some of you who have read the book know that Juan, according to Felipe, might have been the best of the Alou brothers, but when the dictator Rafael Trujillo got assassinated, he got caught up in the revolution, and there were factions fighting for power in the Dominican. And the United States had occupied the DR because there was a socialist named Juan Bosch, who was in exile, that the country wanted him to come and be their next leader. And the United States wanted to block that. They wanted to keep the remnants of Trujillo's family in power because they were afraid if the DR became socialist, the next step was communist. They were already dealing with Cuba. So they went and occupied the island. And Felipe didn't tell me this story. I've since found out about it, but there was a game where he refused to come out for the national anthem. And his comment was, when a country is occupying my country and they don't respect my country, then I'm not going to respect theirs as far as coming out for the national anthem. And what had happened was the United States not only occupied the country and tried to keep a ruthless dictator in power, they took over his parents' home that he had bought for them. And they made it a military base because it was a 2-story house and it had a flat roof, and they could put soldiers up there. And so his parents had to leave their own home and go live with relatives. And his youngest brother, Juan, stayed behind, and he was still in the house. And some of the American soldiers were just coming and going. I mean, this was now their base. And they saw pictures of the Alou brothers, Felipe, Matty, Jesus, on the wall, like you would put your family pictures on the wall. These American soldiers are looking at it and they're saying, "Are these guys your brothers?" "Yeah." "The Alou are your brothers?" "Yeah." You're in his parents' house right now." So he got caught up in the revolution, and there was an incident where there was some Molotov cocktails and things like that, and he got detained. And then they let him go. And then there was another incident he was involved in, and they took him, and the Dominican faction that was detaining him, they probably executed the other guys, but they weren't going to kill one of the Alou brothers. They saw that he was related to the 3 Alou brothers. And so they took him to his parents, and they said, "Get him off the island, because the next time we get him, we can't guarantee that he's coming back alive." So they said, "What's that?"
One more. You probably heard this before. What would you call someone in the family named Robert?
Who would you call someone in the family?
How would
named
you
Rob?
call someone in that family named Robert?
I don't know.
Babalu?
Yeah, yeah. And so they sent Juan to Puerto Rico, where he got a degree in engineering and graduated at the top of his class, and he still lives there. But they were already scouting him. But because of the revolution, the scouts weren't going into the DR for a while because it was too dangerous. And so he kind of slipped through the cracks, even though he was the youngest of the Alou brothers. And then he gets sent to Puerto Rico and pursues an academic career. But there was one winter when Felipe was home, and he's in his neighborhood. He's waiting for a friend, and a Jeep pulls up, and this soldier gets out with a gun, a rifle, and tells him to get off the street, that it's now a military road, it's not a civilian street. And Felipe said, "This is my neighborhood." And he says, "I don't care." And he's poking him with the gun, "Get off the street." And then he threatens Felipe that he's gonna, if he doesn't get off the street, there was a prison camp that they were gonna take him to for people who were rebellious during the occupation. And he said, "I'm listening to this guy, this punk kid, telling me in my country, in my neighborhood, to get off a street, pointing a gun at me, and I'm listening to him, and it's the same accent that I heard when I was in Louisiana, when the same accent was telling me I couldn't play baseball there because of my skin color." So, he had some bitter feelings about what America was doing in his country at the time. And there was an incident when he came back to play, that there was one game where he refused to come out for the national anthem as a single act of protest for what America was doing in the DR, trying to keep a ruthless dictator's family in power.
Also, to take over a home and put soldiers in there, if it was done in the United States, it would violate the Third Amendment of the Constitution against quartering of soldiers.
Exactly.
You know that? You knew that?
Yes.
I once wrote a scholarly article on that. I don't want to.
Isn't it called, there's a word for it too.
Quartering of soldiers. No.
Yeah,
soldiers,
yeah.
But Third Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, and I became aware of that reading about World War II when they were doing that in France. The German, when they occupied France, they were doing that. And then in reading about that, I read that it's part of our Constitution that you cannot do that.
Well, after this is over, Gary will give you your email address, and I'll give you my 1979 Law Journal article on the Third Amendment.
Yep.
I hope it goes through. Well, I don't want to take it. I hope it goes through legibly, but okay, thank you.
Yeah, so you can't do it in this country, but you can do it in another country.
Right?
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Frank. Judge Jim, you're up.
Thanks, Gary, and thank you, Peter. I was interested in your comments about his house, that when you went through, you wouldn't know he was a ball player. He had just a few items of memorabilia. My question would be, what was important to him that he would display, that maybe he was most proud of, that he would, a piece of memorabilia that he might have kept at the house?
There's a Manager of the Year trophy. There's a large blown up photo of him and Moises together with the Expos. There's a piece of artwork that somebody did when he was with the Giants, where he's catching a fly ball, and I guess somebody did the artwork and gifted it to him. And there's some bats and a few balls, and that is it.
Anything with the three of them in the outfield that day? Any photograph of that or any memorabilia about that?
I don't know that a photo exists, because I've been asked that and I've researched it. We cannot find a photo of when those three brothers played the outfield together. Now, the only guy that he sat me down with was Willie Mays. And he doesn't like to impose on people, and most of us are that way. But he didn't want to impose on people. And he, during spring training, because what would happen was he goes out to spring training and he gets, if you've ever been to the Phoenix and the Arizona, Phoenix area in Arizona, the hotels are all spas and resorts pretty much. And so he gets the same, and it's not a hotel room, it's a 2-bedroom apartment basically. And it's just one it's ranch style. There's nobody above you. It's just a sprawling spa resort. And so they keep his grill and all his stuff in storage. And then when he gets the same place every year, so his wife will be with him, but then she'll come back for a week or so. And then when we were working on the book, I would fly out and I would stay with him for a week and a half. And we would work on the book at night. And we'd go to spring training together. And so he sat me down once with Willie Mays. And Willie told me, which was a thrill, as you can imagine, to sit down with Willie Mays. And it was in the clubhouse there at the stadium. And Willie told me that during the course of that game, Felipe had started the game, and then there was a substitution, and there was another brother that came into play. I forget which one. And Willie went to the manager, and I don't remember who it was, if it was Herman, I don't remember. But it's in the book. And Willie went to the manager and said, take me out and put the other brother in. Let all three of them play the outfield together. So it was actually Willie Mays' idea that the three of them play in the outfield together. And if I tell you guys a story, will you keep it amongst ourselves? Because it's a great story. But Felipe will kill me if I tell you. I get a hand up, all right, everybody?
We promise.
How many have read the book and remember the story about Willie Mays and Juan Marichal wrestling? They used to like to wrestle like college kids, like frat boys. So when they would travel, the hotel would have a floor for the blacks and the Latinos, and the white players would be on a different floor. You know, we're going back in the early 60s. And Marichal had played for the Air Force team in the Dominican. Trujillo would just cherry pick somebody and say, I want you to play on this military team, and you had to. And so they were in Houston, and they bought guns. And they're traveling on the flight with their guns. And Marichal was messing around with the gun.
Hello?
And so Willie had his own room.
Yeah, but I'm
Okay. Willie had his own hotel room because he was Willie Mays. Felipe and Marichal are sharing a room together. And they kept their doors open and they're mingling, down the hallway and whatever, getting ready for the game that night, or maybe they just had a game in the afternoon. And so Marichal and Willie liked to wrestle like young guys in their 20s, just goofing around. So Willie comes over and they start wrestling, and Marichal pinned Mays the first time, and then they went and wrestled again, and Mays pinned Marichal the second time, and he wanted to quit while he was ahead. He had just pinned Marichal. So Juan Marichal saying, no, we're going to have a tiebreaker. No, Willie's like, no, we're done, because he had just pinned him. And Marichal's, no, we got to wrestle one more time. And Willie's like, no, man, we're done. So Marichal had the gun on the bed, and he picks it up and he points it at Willie and he says, we're wrestling again. And Willie's like, man, put that thing away, So Marichal's laughing, and he clicked it, and nothing happened. And Willie's like, stop messing around. And he pointed it at the window and clicked it, and nothing happened. And Willie's like, you got to quit. He pointed it at the ceiling, pulled the trigger, and the gun went off. And Felipe says, I can still hear the ringing in my ears, not literally, but he said the plaster and everything started raining down on them. Willie practically fainted in the hallway. The police came, they hushed it all up. So he tells me this story, and he says, but we're not putting that in the book. I said, what do you mean we're not putting that in the book? He goes, no. He goes, it might embarrass Marichal, and those police officers, they really just swept it under the rug, and I don't want them to look bad. And I said, Felipe, we're talking 60 years ago. I don't know that those guys are even alive, and if they are, they probably have told that story on their own many times. And he said, no, we're not going to put that in the book. Well, when I sat down with Willie, I made the mistake of asking him about that story. And I could see immediately on his face, he knew exactly what I was talking about. But he's like, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. Well, he told Felipe that I asked him that question because Felipe didn't want it in the book, and Felipe got pissed at me. It was one of the only times he really got pissed at me. And I apologized, and I said, you know how, because I had been around Willie and I'd seen him interact with people, and it's hard to keep a conversation kind of flowing with him. And so I had asked him some questions about Felipe for the book, and he told me the story about the three brothers in the outfield. He calls him Chico. And I said, you know how it is with him. You get to a point where you're just sitting with him and you're trying to keep the conversation going. And I said, I knew when I asked him that I had made a mistake. And so we patched it up between the two of us, Felipe and I. We wound up putting the story in the book. But in the book, he says that Marichal was messing around with the gun after they got wrestling. And later on, and the implication is like later on, meaning a week or so later or a couple of days later, Marichal found out that there was a gun in one of the chambers. Later on was like 30 seconds later when he pointed it at the ceiling and the gun went off. So that stays in this Zoom room. But if you read the book, you know, like Paul Harvey used to say, you know the rest of the story now.
Thanks, Judge. Mars, you're up. Unmute, Mars. Mars, you're muted, Mars.
All right, I came in late. I was actually at the Giants' victory today. Just got home after the meeting started. The main question I wanted to ask is why Matty Alou and not Felipe Alou? But I want to, before you answer, have your opinion on that, I want to point out something politically, but I don't want to make an issue out of it as a platform. But I recommend the book, The Brothers. It's about John Foster and Allen Dulles. And, it has to do with, I guess you could say, colonialism is how we back a dictator instead of a democratically elected socialist. So when you mention something about Trujillo, that goes, it's par with the course. So I recommend a great book to read. It's called The Brothers. I think it's Clark was the author, but I may be mistaken about that. I have it in the house. But back to my main question. If Felipe Alou was signed with the New York Giants, but I don't believe he played with the New York Giants, he appeared in the first San Francisco Giants team, then why have the road around the Polo Grounds called Matty Alou Way?
Yeah, that question was asked earlier, and I was aware once it got mentioned and asked that there is a Matty Alou Way, and I don't know, and I just kind of Googled it right now, and to look at the story. And what I'm gathering from this is it is a neighborhood where there is a little bit of a Dominican enclave of people. Like many of you who have been to New York know that historically there are different areas that have different ethnicities. But it's talking about it representing Dominicans. And but I've never asked Felipe about it. And somebody mentioned, wouldn't it have been better if it was just called Alou Way rather than Matty Alou Way? And it may be because Matty is probably viewed as having a better playing career. He led the league in batting in 1966. His batting average is higher. I mean, when you think about, just as a side tangent, 66, two brothers finished 1 and 2 in the batting race. If that was going on today in Major League Baseball, it would be blown up. Matty Alou, Felipe Alou finished 1-2. I'm guessing it's because Matty was viewed as having a little bit of a bigger name, but I don't know the answer.
Well, Matty was more like a punch hitter. Philippe had some punch, meaning
He had some power.
Opposite field, not having power. Philippe had the power.
Right, Felipe had power. Matty was transformed when he got to Pittsburgh Harry Walker and Clemente changed how he approached hitting, and he became a very good hitter. And Felipe kind of chafes when people say that he was just sort of a punch and Judy hitter, because he did have a lot of extra base hits and different things. So I'm guessing that probably this street in Manhattan is named after Matty because he's perceived to have had a little bit of a better career, and it's a Dominican neighborhood where the street is named after him.
Well, if that's so, then why push for Felipe in the Hall of Fame and not Matty?
Because of his managerial career, and
Oh,
because
okay.
when we got on it a little after 7, Felipe was the first born and raised Dominican to become a major league player. Ozzie Virgil was not Dominican. He was just born there, but his parents were migrating through the Caribbean from Turks and Caicos, eventually to Puerto Rico, and then to the Bronx. The people in the DR never heard of Ozzie Virgil until he became a major league player, and then they kind of latched on him because he was born in the Dominican. So he was a pioneer, first Dominican born and raised to become a major league player, first Dominican to play in the World Series, first Dominican to become a manager. Now that country produces more players per capita than any other country, and he is their pioneer. He is the one, when you go through tourist areas or customs and you see historical things about the DR, Felipe's picture is up there as the first one. And he is the one in their school books as the guy who paved the way and showed all these other guys that it can be done.
Thank you, Morris.
Thank you, Peter.
I got a question for you. It may sound a bit odd. Growing up, I was a young boy. My father never called him Felipe Alou. It was Felipe Alou. Was he mistaken, or was that what he was, Felipe Alou, called earlier in his career? Or was my dad just not talking right?
Yeah, it's Felipe. And he mentioned when we started working on the book, he says, not only did they get my last name wrong, they didn't know how to pronounce my first name.
And also, was there, you were talking about maybe Matty being a better hitter, average hitter. Was there a lot of, brothers competition between the three major leaguers, or was it more of a love affair between them?
Yeah, more of a love affair. In fact, when we talk about the three of them playing the outfield together, we talk about pride. Did you feel a measure of pride? He goes, I was so concerned about something happening with my brothers in the outfield. It was more of, I was the older brother and I was always the protector. Again, he signed so that his family could have food. And when we talk about the Hall of Fame, he's very, no. He goes, if they want to do something for the Alou brothers all together, which they're not going to do, there's no plaque that says DiMaggio brothers or whatever, but he is very much, there's no sibling rivalry. Jesus lives has a home. They have 2 homes next door to each other in the Dominican. There is no sibling rivalry at all. He's very proud of his brothers and very proud of his sons. He was telling me about Luis Rojas well before he ever made it with the Mets. And he's not going to brag about his kids just because they're his kids, because he'll point out some things that are not right. But he said, Luis he's got something special. I think he's going to be a major league manager. Now, his other son is in the minor league system with the Orioles right now, Felipe Alou Jr. Of course, Moises, everybody knows about Moises Alou. So he tells it like it is, but he's very proud of his brothers. And to him, they're all like 3 and 1.
Thank you. Anybody else with a question before we wrap things up? Peter, we cannot thank you enough for giving us the time tonight.
I hope it was enjoyable.
Again, best way to get your book is through Amazon, correct?
Correct.
Guys,
and if you've gotten it and read it, and you can just leave a review, that helps tremendously.
Wonderful. Peter, please, again, we would be, more than well behind you as far as supporting him in his quest for Hall of Fame nomination. So keep us in mind and don't be a stranger, okay?
Thank you.
Guys
Thank you.
and
Peter.
gals, let's give it up for Peter Kerasotis.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Peter. I will hang out here, closing up the room.
There you go. I just saw the book. Jason.
I'll
Bye,
close
guys.
up the room and we will meet again next Thursday with Rich Glazer and the New York Giants trivia night. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.